For most of her 62 years, Eleanor Price had lived a life of quiet dignity. Her white farmhouse, nestled on the edge of a sleepy town in southern Oregon, stood like a relic of a different time, its wraparound porch creaking under the weight of memory. The shutters were faded, the rose bushes stubbornly blooming out front, and wind chimes whispered in the breeze, the only music that ever filled the silence now. 5 years had passed since her husband, Dr. Thomas Price, died of pancreatic cancer. He was the town's beloved family doctor, and Eleanor had been his faithful partner, both in marriage and in purpose. She'd spent 3 decades teaching high school literature while he ran his clinic. Together, they were the kind of couple people looked up to. Stable, steady, decent. But now the house was too quiet, the mornings too long, and Eleanor, despite the books, the tea, the gardening, and the choir practice on Sundays, felt like a shadow of the woman she once was. Her days blurred together. Toast and eggs at 7, birds at the feeder by 8, a walk around the garden by 9. She'd write in her journal, make small lists of groceries, and sometimes read the same paragraph in a novel over and over again without realizing she wasn't really seeing the words. Nights were harder. Nights reminded her there was no one on the other side of the bed. Her daughter, Lena, 38, called every few weeks from Chicago. A brilliant but tightly wound financial consultant, Lena had never approved of her mother's decision to stay in that old house after Thomas died. "Sell it. Move closer to me," she'd say. "This place is holding you back." But Eleanor held on, not out of fear or inertia, but out of something else, loyalty. The house was where she and Thomas had built their lives. It held his voice in the floors, his laughter in the kitchen tiles, his scent in the cedar chest upstairs. She wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. Still, grief is a strange companion. It changes shape. At first, it arrives like a hurricane. Then, it becomes quieter, sneakier, hiding in the sound of the washing machine, the empty coffee cup on the table, the echo in the hallway. Lately, Eleanor had begun to feel it press harder, like an invisible weight on her chest. She wasn't sick, at least not in the way a doctor could diagnose, but there were days she felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped out the inside of her and left only a shell. One Tuesday morning in early spring, something inside her shifted. She stood in front of the mirror, brushing her silver-streaked hair, and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her once clear blue eyes looked cloudier. Her cheeks had sunken just slightly, and for the first time in years, she whispered to her reflection, "Is this it? Is this how it ends?" That same afternoon, while dropping off a prescription at the local pharmacy, she noticed a flyer pinned on the bulletin board near the entrance. Low-impact fitness classes for seniors, taught by certified trainer. Tuesdays and Thursdays at 5 p.m., Community Wellness Center. She didn't know what made her take it down. Maybe it was the word wellness. Maybe it was the growing sense that if she didn't do something, time would finish what grief had started. She signed up the next day. Eleanor walked into that gymnasium with sneakers that still had dust on them and a sweatshirt she hadn't worn since the Obama administration. The room smelled like floor polish and linoleum and eucalyptus oil from someone's yoga mat. She felt ridiculous. But then she saw him. Jordan Miles. Tall. Lean. Smiling like the world hadn't broken him yet. Maybe 26. Maybe 27. She wasn't sure. He wore a plain black t-shirt that clung to his chest, and his voice had the kind of calm confidence that made people listen. "Take your time," he said, gently guiding her to a yoga mat. "We're not here to push. We're just here to move." Eleanor smiled for the first time in weeks. She didn't know then that this young man, this stranger who smelled like peppermint and patience, would change the entire course of her life. But he would, and when it ended, people would say she should have known better, that a 62-year-old widow had no business falling for a 26-year-old trainer. But love never asks for permission, and sometimes the heart takes a risk that the mind will never understand. The first few classes came and went like a gentle ripple in a still pond. Eleanor would arrive 5 minutes early, sit near the back, and move carefully through the stretches. Jordan always noticed her, not in the way men notice women, but in the way a good soul sees another soul try to come alive again. He never pushed her. Just lift your arms as high as you can, he'd say, kneeling beside her mat. Don't compare yourself to anyone, especially not your younger self. That woman did a great job. Let's thank her and move with who you are today. It was the first time in years Eleanor didn't feel like a burden to her own body. After class one evening, Jordan offered to walk her to her car. Rain had started to fall in a soft, steady mist. They paused by the driver's door. You've got a really calm energy, he said. Not everyone does. I think people feel safe around you. Eleanor laughed, startled by the compliment. I've never heard anyone describe me like that. Well, Jordan shrugged. Sometimes people only say those things at funerals. I'd rather say them now. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. Not because of his looks, though he was undeniably handsome in a quiet, boyish way, but because of the kindness. It had been so long since someone saw her as more than just a woman growing older. Jordan saw her, really saw her, and spoke to her like she mattered. By the third week, they were talking after every session. At first, it was casual, books, music, the best place to get peach cobbler in town. But then came deeper things. How Jordan had grown up bouncing between relatives after his mother's addiction left her in rehab. How he'd put himself through fitness school while working night shifts at a warehouse. Eleanor shared, too, about Lena, about Thomas, about how hard it was to lose not just a partner, but the life that went with him. They started meeting for coffee on weekends. Jordan would show up in a flannel shirt, his hair still damp from the gym. Eleanor wore makeup again. She'd forgotten how nice it felt to be asked, "What's your favorite kind of pie?" and know the question was sincere. One Sunday, they walked through the farmer's market. An older woman in a wide-brimmed hat gave them a look, long, puzzled, maybe judgmental. Jordan leaned closer and whispered, "That woman's going to think I'm your long-lost nephew or something." Eleanor smiled, but deep down something shifted. She realized they were no longer just student and instructor, or even just friends. There was an intimacy building, a quiet gravity pulling them towards something that didn't yet have a name. It was both thrilling and terrifying. Back at her house one afternoon, after he helped her plant lavender in the garden, they sat on the porch drinking iced tea. The sun was low. The scent of warm earth and blossoms floated around them. "I like it here," Jordan said. "It's peaceful. Feels like a place people forget how to find." "You're always welcome," Eleanor replied before she could stop herself, then quickly added, "I mean, if you ever want quiet. Or fresh air." He nodded, then turned to her and said something she wouldn't forget. "You make things feel still, like in a good way. I've never had that. You calm a noise in my head." No one had said that to her before. Not Thomas, not even her daughter. It wasn't romance yet. Not quite, but the seed had been planted. That night, as she stood in front of her mirror again, brushing her hair, Eleanor touched her own cheek with surprise. There was color there, warmth, and a sparkle in her eyes she hadn't seen in years. But with warmth comes fear. She knew how the world looked at women like her. A 62-year-old widow, falling for a 26-year-old trainer. They'd call her desperate, delusional, pathetic. They'd assume he wanted her money, her house, her name on a will. Even Lena would scoff, especially Lena, and so she told herself to be cautious. But the heart, once awakened, rarely returns to sleep without a fight. As spring slipped into summer, Eleanor found herself standing at the edge of something she never thought she'd feel again. Something new, something dangerous, something like love. By mid-June, Eleanor and Jordan were inseparable. They took morning walks in the park, had lunch at the cafe downtown, where the waitresses started calling them the cute couple, and spent quiet evenings on Eleanor's porch, talking about everything and nothing, like they had all the time in the world. For Eleanor, it felt like being reborn. There was a lightness in her step, a renewed energy in her spirit. She began painting again, something she hadn't done since Thomas passed. She wore earrings. She hummed while folding laundry. The house, once steeped in silence and dust, now pulsed with life. But small towns talk. It started with whispers at the church potluck. "She's old enough to be his mother. I heard he was in trouble with the law once. She must be paying him." Eleanor tried to ignore it. She told herself people always fear what they don't understand. And maybe that was true. But there was one voice she couldn't ignore, her daughter's. Lena called one evening as Eleanor was preparing dinner. The phone rang 3 times before Eleanor answered, smiling as she stirred the stew. "Hey, sweetheart." But Lena didn't exchange pleasantries. "Mom," she said, "who is this guy?" Eleanor's smile faded. "Jordan?" "Yes, Jordan. The guy who shows up in all your photos now. Who's half your age. What the hell is going on?" Eleanor sighed. "We've been spending time together." "Spending time?" Lena repeated, her voice sharp. "You're dating him?" "Yes," Eleanor said softly. "I am." There was a long pause. Then, "Jesus, Mom, are you serious? He's younger than me. He's 26. And age isn't what? A factor? You're 62. People don't just fall in love across decades like that." "I didn't plan for this," Eleanor said. "But it happened. And he's kind to me. He treats me with respect. He makes me laugh again." Lena scoffed. "Of course he does. Because you have money. A house. A pension. God, Mom, you're a walking target. That's not fair." "No. What's not fair is you embarrassing yourself. And me. Do you know what my coworkers will say if they find out? This is humiliating." Eleanor went still. For the first time in the conversation, her tone turned firm. "I didn't raise you to speak to me like that. I understand this is uncomfortable for you. But I'm not asking for your blessing. I'm just asking you to respect me. As a woman. Not just your mother." Lena didn't reply. She hung up without saying goodbye. Eleanor stood by the stove for a long time, the stew slowly burning as tears welled in her eyes. 2 weeks later, Jordan proposed. It wasn't grand. There was no kneeling or diamond ring. Just two people sitting under a string of porch lights, hands entwined, hearts exposed. "I know this sounds crazy," Jordan said, his voice trembling just slightly. "But I don't want to spend another day without knowing you're mine." Eleanor stared at him, stunned. He continued, "People are going to judge us no matter what. But what we have, it's real. I don't care if they believe it or not. I love you." Eleanor blinked, feeling something shift in her chest. A click, a soft click, like a door unlocking inside her. She whispered yes. The wedding was held in Eleanor's backyard under a canopy of white roses. Only a handful of guests attended, some neighbors, a couple from the gym, and Jordan's cousin from Portland. Lena didn't show up. Eleanor had mailed her an invitation anyway, handwritten in soft blue ink. But it came back unopened. Still, the day was beautiful. Eleanor wore a flowing cream dress. Jordan wore a navy suit with no tie, his sleeves rolled up by sunset. They laughed. They danced barefoot in the grass. For a moment, it felt like love had won. But beneath the joy, a quiet tension brewed. Whispers kept floating in from town, about Jordan's past, about what he's really after, about how long this could possibly last. Eleanor brushed it off. She trusted her heart. But trust is a fragile thing, and hearts, no matter how brave, still bleed when pierced. One afternoon, Eleanor received a letter in the mail. No return address, just her name, scribbled in angry black ink. Inside was a single piece of paper. "He's lying to you. Ask him about 2017. Ask him what happened in Portland." Her hands trembled. She set the letter down and stared at it, heart pounding. That night, after dinner, she asked him. Jordan went still. He looked down at his hands, then up at her. "There's something I haven't told you." Jordan sat across from Eleanor, elbows on the kitchen table, his fingers nervously tracing the rim of his coffee mug. He looked like a man standing in front of a door he wasn't sure he wanted to open. "It was 5 years ago," he began. "I was 21, working nights at a bar in Portland. My roommate got into trouble with a bookie, gambling debts. One night, he asked me to help him grab some stuff from a storage unit. Turned out, he was robbing the place." Eleanor stared, saying nothing. "I didn't know until we were already in. Alarm went off. Cops came. He ran. I froze. They arrested me. I got charged with breaking and entering. I took a plea, did 6 months probation, paid the fine. No jail, but it's on my record." He looked up, eyes pleading. "I didn't tell you because I thought you'd see me differently, like everyone else does." Eleanor leaned back slowly, her heart beat in her ears. "I wish you had told me," she said softly. "I know," he replied, "but I swear to you, I'm not that kid anymore. I worked hard to build something, to be someone decent." She believed him, or at least she wanted to. After a long pause, she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but was a bridge, and Jordan held on to it like it was the only thing keeping him above water. Weeks passed. The town remained skeptical. A few clients canceled Jordan's sessions at the gym. Eleanor overheard whispers at the grocery store, in church, even from a longtime friend who told her, it's not too late to annul. But Eleanor stood firm. She had spent a lifetime doing what was expected. She had buried a husband, raised a daughter, served her community. This was the first time she chose herself, chose joy, even if it didn't come wrapped in the form the world approved of. Then, something happened that neither of them expected. Eleanor missed her period. At first, she thought it was nothing, just the result of stress. But a strange fluttering in her stomach led her to schedule a doctor's appointment. A blood test, then an ultrasound, then a quiet conversation in the exam room. She was pregnant. At 62, the doctor called it a miracle pregnancy. Rare, but not impossible, especially given that Eleanor had frozen her eggs in her 40s, during a period when she and Thomas had briefly considered IVF after multiple miscarriages. She had kept that part of her life private, even from Lena. It was a quiet grief. And now, out of nowhere life. When she told Jordan, he went pale, then silent. You're sure? He whispered. I saw the heartbeat, she replied. He sat down on the edge of the bed, staring into space. Then, slowly, a smile broke through his shock. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tighter than he ever had. We're going to be parents, he said. I never thought. I've dreamed of being a dad, but I never thought it would actually happen. Eleanor cried into his shoulder. It was terrifying, beautiful, impossible, and real. She waited 2 weeks before telling Lena. They met at a cafe halfway between Eleanor's home and the airport. Lena arrived late, crisp in a gray blazer, her hair tied back so tightly it looked painful. I don't have much time, she said, glancing at her watch. What's so urgent? Eleanor sipped her tea before speaking. I'm pregnant. The words hung in the air like smoke. Lena blinked, laughed once, sharp and bitter. Excuse me? You heard me. There was silence. Then Lena slammed her hand on the table, causing a couple nearby to look over. This is insane, Mom. You're 62. I know. No, you don't. This is reckless. It's selfish. You're going to have a baby with some kid who has a criminal record? What are you thinking? Eleanor's voice trembled, but her eyes stayed firm. I'm thinking that maybe after a lifetime of doing things the right way, I deserve this. I deserve to feel alive. Lena shook her head, disgusted. You're going to die before that kid finishes high school. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. I may not have 30 years to give this child, but I have now, and I'll give it everything I have. Lena stood up, tossing her napkin on the table. I hope you come to your senses before it's too late. She left without hugging her mother. Eleanor sat alone for a long time, hands gently resting on her stomach. For the first time in her life, she wasn't sure she'd ever get her daughter back. But as she walked to her car, she whispered to herself, I'm not turning back. She didn't know then that the life she was carrying would never take its first breath, or that her daughter's rage hadn't reached its limit yet. The weeks after the cafe confrontation were tense and oddly quiet. Lena didn't call, didn't text, didn't even send the usual birthday card Eleanor had half hoped for. And while Eleanor tried to move forward with strength, the pressure of it all, the whispers, the pregnancy, the fear, began to chip away at her calm exterior. Even the baby, who once gave her so much hope, now filled her with a strange, flickering anxiety. Not about the child itself, but the world this child might come into. Still, Jordan remained steady. He doubled his hours at the gym, saving for a nursery remodel. Every morning, he brought Eleanor her prenatal vitamins with a fresh glass of orange juice. Every night, he rubbed her lower back as she eased into bed. But even love, when surrounded by suspicion, begins to fray. Then, one morning, a thick manila envelope arrived at their doorstep. No return address. Inside were printouts, dozens of them, bank statements, old court records, screenshots of social media posts from years ago. A printed mugshot of Jordan from when he was 21, eyes red-rimmed and defiant, caught in that single mistake that refused to die. There was also a note. Typed. Cold. This is who he really is. Wake up before it's too late. Eleanor's hands trembled as she read through it. Though nothing in the file was new to her, the tone, the threat felt invasive, targeted, cruel. She didn't show Jordan at first, but he found her crying that evening in the bathroom, the envelope sitting open on the sink. He didn't say anything. He just sat on the edge of the tub, rubbing his temples, jaw tight. She's trying to break us, Eleanor said, and I'm scared because maybe she can. Jordan finally looked at her. I'd rather live in a tent with you than in this house with all this hate. You know that, right? Eleanor nodded, but something in her eyes had changed. A flicker of fear he hadn't seen before. Later that week, Eleanor woke to find Jordan gone. His phone was on the kitchen counter, but the car was missing. She called the gym. He hadn't come in. Called his cousin in Portland. He hadn't heard from him either. Panic surged, but by evening he returned. He smelled of whiskey, though he didn't stumble. He said he just needed to get out, to breathe, that everything felt like it was closing in, that he was trying to protect her, but couldn't even protect himself from his past. I'm sorry, he whispered. It won't happen again. Eleanor forgave him, but she also locked the door that night. A quiet, subconscious motion she hadn't done since before they met. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday night. Eleanor was in the nursery, folding tiny onesies she had bought earlier that week. Her belly was starting to show, a soft swell she often cradled when no one was looking. A knock came at the front door. It was Lena, soaking wet, eyes wild. Eleanor hesitated, then opened the door. What are you doing here? She asked, surprised but cautious. Lena pushed past her, water dripping from her coat. I need to talk to you. Now. Jordan wasn't home. He'd gone to pick up takeout. The house was quiet, and the air felt charged. Lena stood in the living room, arms crossed. Her voice was low, shaking. Mom, I'm begging you. This has to stop. You don't know him like I do. He's manipulating you. This pregnancy, it's not love. It's a strategy. Eleanor, step back. You don't get to say that. He wants control. He wants money. He wants a kid to tie you down so you can't ever leave. Eleanor's voice rose. You don't know that. Yes, I do, Lena snapped. Because I've seen men like him. In court. In settlements. I know the signs. You're a case waiting to happen. A silence stretched between them. Then Eleanor said something she hadn't meant to say. Not like this. I'm changing the will. If something happens to me, Jordan will raise the child. Lena's eyes widened. You're serious? I am. It was the final blow. Lena lunged forward, grabbing the envelope of documents from the table, the same one she had mailed anonymously weeks ago, and threw it across the room. You're insane, she hissed. He's not your partner. He's your predator. And if you can't see that, maybe you don't deserve this baby. Eleanor slapped her. A hard, sudden, reactionary strike. It shocked them both. Lena clutched her cheek, eyes brimming with tears, not just from the pain, but the betrayal. I'm leaving, she said. And when this all burns down around you, don't call me. She stormed out. Eleanor collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. She didn't notice the framed wedding photo. Her and Jordan under the rose canopy, tilled off the wall and fall to the floor. The glass cracked. She wouldn't live to see it fixed, because the very next evening, while Jordan was out, someone would return to the house. And by morning, Eleanor Price would be dead. It was Jordan who found her. He came home around 9:15 p.m. that Friday evening, arms full of takeout containers, soaked from the sudden downpour that had turned the streets into silver rivers. The porch light was off, which was strange. Eleanor always left it on when he went out. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Ellie, he called, dropping the bags on the kitchen counter. No answer. He moved from room to room. Living room, nursery, hallway. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only reply. Then he saw it, a faint sliver of light under the bedroom door. He pushed it open, and time froze. Eleanor lay on the floor beside the bed, one arm tucked awkwardly beneath her body, the other stretched out toward the nightstand. Her skin had gone gray, her lips tinged blue. There was a small pool of blood behind her head, barely visible against the dark hardwood. Her eyes were open, unblinking. He dropped to his knees, screamed her name, and tried CPR, clumsy, desperate compressions as hot tears blurred his vision. But he knew. Somewhere deep down, he knew she was already gone. When paramedics arrived 11 minutes later, she was pronounced dead at the scene. The official report read, "Death under uncertain circumstances. Possible fall. Possible cardiac event." But something didn't sit right. Detective Rachel Monroe had seen enough cases to know when a room told a lie. There were no signs of forced entry. No valuables missing. No defensive wounds on Eleanor's hands or arms. But there was that strange, subtle blood smear on the edge of the dresser. Like someone had tried to clean something and stopped halfway. Then there was the broken glass frame on the floor, a wedding photo, face down. Rachel stood in that bedroom for nearly 30 minutes, saying nothing, just listening. The house didn't sound like it was grieving. It sounded robbed of something. Robbed of air, of peace, of life. The next morning, the autopsy came back with something unexpected. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the skull. More tellingly, there were faint bruises on Eleanor's upper arms. Like someone had grabbed her. Not violently, but forcefully. Like a shove. Like an argument gone too far. The medical examiner didn't call it murder. Not yet. But he didn't call it an accident either. So the case was reopened. Quietly. Rachel's first stop was Jordan. He looked broken. Disheveled. Eyes bloodshot from crying and lack of sleep. "I'd never hurt her," he said, his voice cracking. "God, I loved her. I don't care what anyone says. I didn't do this." Rachel watched him carefully. "Where were you between 8 and 9 p.m.? "At Whole Foods. Then I picked up dinner at Carmichael's." "There are receipts. Cameras, probably." There were. His alibi checked out. But just to be sure, Rachel pulled surveillance footage. Jordan had been inside the store at 8:44 p.m. Back at his car at 9:02. The house was a 12-minute drive away. Timeline was tight. Too tight for him to be the killer. So if not Jordan, then who? The investigation widened. Neighbors were questioned. Friends. Former students of Eleanor. Even her church pastor. Then came the tip. A neighbor across the street mentioned seeing a black sedan parked near Eleanor's driveway around 8:30 p.m. the night she died. They thought it was a rideshare car, until they recognized the woman getting out. Lena. Detective Monroe paid her a visit 2 days later in Chicago. Lena was calm, measured, wearing a navy pantsuit and pearl earrings. "Yes, I visited my mother last week," she admitted. "We argued. I left. That was the last time I saw her." "What time did you leave?" Rachel asked. "Before dark. Around 7. But phone records told a different story. Lena's GPS pinged near her mother's home at 8:37 p.m. When confronted with the discrepancy, her calm cracked. She was making a mistake, Lena said, eyes burning. She was changing everything, leaving it all to him. He was going to ruin her. "I just want to make her see." Rachel's voice was steady. "Did you touch her? Push her?" Lena's jaw clenched. "We argued. I grabbed her arm. She pulled away. She tripped. I didn't mean..." She stopped herself. Too late. A week later, Lena Price was arrested on charges of manslaughter and obstruction of justice. The DA offered a plea, 8 years in exchange for confession and cooperation. At the sentencing hearing, Lena finally spoke. "I never meant to kill her," she said, cry for the first time. "I just wanted her to stop, to come back to who she was. I lost my mother before she even died." But no one wept harder than Jordan, sitting in the back row, his hands clenched around a photo of the ultrasound Eleanor had printed just days before her death. The baby didn't survive the trauma. He had lost everything. The house on Hawthorne Lane stood quiet again. No more wind chimes, no laughter drifting from the porch, no flower beds bursting with new lavender. Just shutters slowly falling into disrepair and a cracked front step that no one had bothered to fix. Eleanor Price had been gone for 3 months. The headlines came and went. Daughter charged in mother's death over May-December romance. Elderly widow's tragic fall wasn't an accident. Inheritance, anger, and a secret pregnancy. Then the story faded like they all do. But for Jordan, the grief stayed. He didn't go back to the gym. He couldn't walk past the nursery. Some days, he couldn't even get out of bed. The silence inside Eleanor's home was no longer peaceful. It was punishing. It whispered every memory back to him in cruel echoes. The first time she smiled at him across the mat, the way her hand fit inside his, the sound of her laugh when he told her he never learned to bake, the softness of her voice when she said, "You make me feel alive again." She was gone. The baby was gone. And all that remained was a man who loved too late, and a world that had refused to believe in them from the start. At the sentencing, Jordan stood outside the courtroom for a long time, unsure if he'd go in. He didn't want to see Lena, didn't want to hear her speak, but something pulled him in. She didn't look like the woman who had stormed into Eleanor's house that night. She looked smaller, fragile, but not broken in the way he was. When the judge asked if anyone wished to speak before sentencing, Jordan stood. "I know most people didn't understand us," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "They thought it was fake, that I was using her, that she was lonely and blind. But what we had, it wasn't perfect, it wasn't convenient, but it was real." He paused, swallowing hard. "Eleanor saved me. Not with money, not with her name. She loved me in a way no one ever had. And I would have spent the rest of my life proving she was right to believe in me. But I never got that chance." He looked over at Lena. She didn't die because she was old. She didn't die because she was naive. She died because someone decided her love was unacceptable and tried to control it. The courtroom sat still. When he sat down, no one clapped. No one whispered. Just silence and the weight of truth. Lena was sentenced to 8 years in state prison. She never looked back at him. Jordan stayed in town for another month, just long enough to pack Eleanor's things. He didn't sell the house. Instead, he donated it to the local women's shelter. Said she would have wanted it that way. The lavender bushes stayed. The nursery stayed. The photo of their wedding, cracked glass and all, was the only thing he took with him. He left Oregon quietly, moved to Montana, found work rebuilding hiking trails. He never remarried. But every year, on the same June afternoon they danced barefoot in the yard, he wrote Eleanor a letter. He never mailed it, just tucked it into a small wooden box he kept beneath his bed, alongside the ultrasound and a pressed white rose from their wedding bouquet. People in town still talk about her sometimes. About the teacher who fell in love again at 62. About the boy who brought her back to life. And about how, even in death, Eleanor Price dared to live on her own terms. Because love doesn't come with guarantees. It doesn't ask permission. And sometimes it leaves behind a story too painful to forget, but too beautiful not to remember.